So, I think we can make a start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to those of you who have joined, and a very warm welcome to our first fireside conversation. My name is Najla Rettberg. I'm the coordinator / managing director of Base4NFDI, and I'm based at the Technical University of Dresden. Just a bit of housekeeping as we get going. You know, I'm sure you've noticed that this session is being recorded. So you, as our guests, have the pleasure of sitting back and enjoying this fireside conversation. You have limited Zoom functions, but you are welcome to put a question or two in the chat. We won't have a huge amount of time to cover all of your questions, but I hope that towards the end we can indeed address some of them. And of course, your observations are always very useful and interesting to us. So just before I introduce our guest, I would like to start by thanking our co-organisers of our fireside conversation. This is the Research Data Alliance, which is a global organisation that builds solutions for research data management, research data software, and many other societal issues around digital transformation. So do look it up. Membership is free to Research Data Alliance. And also there are organisational members as well, of which the Digital Alliance of Canada and the Australian Research Data Commons are members of. And our other organisation is ARDC, the Australian Research Data Council, which is Australia's national digital research infrastructure provider. And it builds leading-edge digital research tools for Australia's researchers. And it enjoys many different international partnerships as well. So, before I introduce our guest, a little bit of context for why we're having these fireside chat conversations. I am based at the National Research Data Infrastructure within Germany. This is a very large endeavour. It started back in 2020, and it's really pulling together the large scientific research data management community in Germany, and it's building many different solutions specifically for the different disciplines. So it structures itself around 26 different disciplinary consortia, of which many experts are working together to promote fair practices and open sciences right at the forefront to the many different communities they serve, and really building fit-for-purpose and relevant tools. So it's very unique. It is operated from an office in Karlsruhe, which is the directorate. And then there is my initiative, which is Base4NFDI, which I suppose is building an overlayer of generic services to serve this disciplinary communities in the NFDI. And we're building many different services. We don't operate them, but we give them seed money to get off the ground and become mature through a different sort of three-phase process, so to speak. And we really want to make them appropriate to our communities, and we work hard on user engagement. And of course, the big question that we have in our minds is sustaining these services. Once they get to maturity, what are the questions we need to ask ourselves? What is the buy-in we need from our community? And so it's in that context that we want to have these dialogues with infrastructure providers and leaders in national infrastructures across the globe. And so it's really a wonderful honor to be able to have secured an interview with Michael Schull of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Just quickly a little bit of background before Michael introduces it properly. I guess it started 2019 and became it's sort of the name it is today in 2021. Its tagline is Powering Canadian Innovation by Integrating and Supporting Advanced Research Computing, Research Data Management and Research Software. And the ultimate goal is to deliver a cohesive national data ecosystem. So I think a lot of parallels for those of you from NFDI who are here today will see there. So this is going to be fascinating. And Michael, before I hand over to you, I do want to give a bit of background to you, because this is a really interesting profile that you have. You are a medical doctor by training. You are a professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto, I believe, and a senior scientist at the Sunnybrook Research Institute. Throughout your career, you've led major initiatives to expand researcher access to different data types, launched a health AI data analytics platform. And I was just having a look at your prolific output. I looked at Scopus or ORCID. I mean, you have well over 500 outputs, and many of which, I have to say, are in open access, as well as many data sets that you've shared. So you practice, I think, what we all preach in the NFDI community, and that's, you're obviously, very hands-on. But above all, you're a leader. You have a really great track record, and you have led for 12 years as CEO of the Institute of Clinical Evaluative Sciences, which delivers healthcare data, I would say, to Ontario and its citizens, and had a very, I would say, busy time during COVID, during the pandemic, delivering what was, very important data on a daily basis during this rather scary time to the relevant authorities in Ontario. So hats off. So I guess you're fairly new in your role as CEO, and yeah, now maybe we can start. I'm going to pull up my chair. It's not, ironically, not a very firesidey because the sun has finally come out in Germany. It's been a very cold, grim winter. So, Michael, my first question to you is, how is the weather in Toronto? And my second question is, please tell us about Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Why did you join? What makes it special? Over to you, Michael.
All right. Well, first of all, Najla, thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you and your colleagues today and the broader audience. I missed the detail that this is the first Fireside Chat, so I'm really honored that I've been asked to give the first Fireside Chat. I'm looking forward to assisting and listening in on many more. You asked about the weather. Well, I'm jealous that you have sunshine because right now we have rain and cold. It's been also a really nasty winter and spring here. So we are compatriots in that regard as well. I'll just start actually by making what's traditional in Canada for events like this, which is called an Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. So I'm actually in Toronto, Canada. This is the historic lands of the Mississaugas of the New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and today many other First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples call Toronto home, and we are very fortunate to share these lands with them. So I'm delighted to be here with you today. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. What makes the Alliance special? Now, I actually, one thing that's special is its name. As you introduced it, it's Digital Research Alliance of Canada, and I call it DRAC, which is DRAC, the acronym, and that alone is catchy and certainly memorable, and makes it somewhat special. But more importantly than that, I think what makes it special in Canada is that it is truly the only national organization with the mandate that you described to support compute for research, for public sector researchers, to support data and making not just data management, but making data more available, more findable, more accessible, and usable to researchers. Research software aspect as well, of course. I think it really is part of, delivering hardware. You also have to deliver the appropriate software stacks and so on. And then finally, supporting expertise and people across the country to support researchers, students, to access compute and data, and make use of it, and use it within a network of supercomputers that we effectively manage and oversee in partnership with universities where these host sites currently reside and are operated. So it's really that tripartite mandate, if you will, compute data people, and we like to sort of frame it that way because we think that all three are absolutely critical to actually delivering on our mission. Because if you have data without compute, that doesn't help. If you have compute without data, that doesn't help. And if you have compute and data, but you don't have the expertise to support researchers to use it, that also doesn't work very well. So it really takes all three.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you. So I'd like to get back to some of those points, this tripartite, and I think that's a good takeaway to start with. Could you just tell us a little bit about the services you provide. You have research data management services and you have some cloud compute, I understand. And, what are you operating? What are you not operating? Perhaps that's interesting for the audience.
Yeah. So first of all, we are both a fund and an operator, if you will. So like Base4NFDI, we do fund services and infrastructure across the country, and we do that in partnership, as I mentioned, with university partners, but also provincial governments, regional computer organizations, and so on, who co-fund those services, the hardware, the delivery, et cetera. But increasingly, we are also directly operating some of these services. So if we start with compute, we work, as I mentioned, with partners in the operation of 5 supercomputer clusters across the country. There are 2 in British Columbia, 2 in Ontario, 1 in Quebec, and these are available to researchers from anywhere in the country. And these have evolved over many years. Of course, they've been funded for many years, and they've expanded and grown and been refreshed over a number of years. Most recently, just in the last 2 years, we did a refresh of all 5 of these sites. And there's been a general trend over time of consolidation. So if you go back, 15 years or so, there used to be 10 or 12 or 15 supercomputer clusters, and over time, the government has and the community really have consolidated around 5 national supercomputing centers. Now, there's obviously capacity elsewhere in the system within universities, research institutes, and so on. But as far as a national network, there are those 5 host sites. There are also 3 AI institutes that we work with closely that have some of their own compute infrastructure that we fund but do not operate. That is operated independently. So when it comes to the compute, we operate a number of services that relates to that. So while we are funders of compute, it is operated locally by the host institutions. When it comes to, for example, allocation and scheduling, there are national services, a national oversight of how the compute is allocated to researchers. That is managed by DRAC. There is also a scheduling service that is managed largely by DRAC. And so there's this kind of co-management, if you will, of that national research infrastructure. There is also oversight around things like cybersecurity to ensure that national standards are met with respect to cybersecurity. When it comes to data, we manage a number of services that relate to data management. So we do manage some cloud storage private cloud storage for research data sets. These are a federated research model where we are both storing but also making available for reuse large research data sets that are difficult to manage elsewhere. It can be climate science, it can be in other areas as well, and that is a service that we provide essentially. There's a number of other services that we have begun to provide over the last year or so. For example, we've just launched a distributed compute and storage grid service. This is the actual hardware that we are implementing in multiple sites across the country. So far, there are 7 sites where we are installing this hardware. So this is basically hardware that will provide local compute, local storage for a research facility. This could be at a university, it could be at a research institute, but it is networked. It is networked so that it can allow data visitation and ultimately data federation from elsewhere in the country. So that's really the vision on the hardware side, is to build out that distributed compute and storage grid more broadly, so that we begin to make data available, findable, linkable, and potentially brought together in a pooled data environment if that's appropriate. But in some cases that isn't appropriate or possible, in which case federation would be a more sensible approach. So the idea is that this will allow for both of those solutions. Finally, we've just launched another pilot called National Data Spaces. So this is an effort to work with science domains to fund them to actually develop standards around interoperability, data shareability, data findability, so that ultimately data can be more readily brought together by researchers for their projects. So we've just launched 4. There's 1 in the social sciences, 1 in genomics, 1 in avian zoology, and one in ocean science as well. So those are just examples, Najla, of some of the services that we run. There are others that we can go into, but
Yeah.
I'll stop
Thank you.
there.
Yeah, and I mean, there's an interesting question from Rosie Hicks. I want to get onto the people in a bit, but perhaps maybe it would be good to talk a little bit, I mean, about the data itself and the engagement and how, you know, the data can be produced and people that are using your services. I mean, research infrastructures ultimately hinge on the communities they serve and they're tailored to. And in some cases, you know, these will fly and these won't. And do you have, I mean, you've just explained your data spaces. How do you know who your user base is, and is the data spaces the solution? Then how can you become a data space within the alliance? What are the pathways to be able to do that, so that you can ensure that the researchers are using your resources and producing the data in a fair way?
Yeah. So, you know, we say researchers, right? It is
Yeah.
highly variable. So there are about 20,000 researchers, you know, in a given year who'll be using our infrastructure, the compute infrastructure, and so on. So it's a large number, number one. And in some cases, an individual researcher who needs access to compute to undertake a study on data that he or she is collecting, him or herself. In other cases, we're talking about partners who are research platforms that are collecting vast amounts of data, you know, astronomy data or oceanography data or climate science, you name it, or health data. And they require compute for managing or analyzing that vast amount of data or storage support. So in terms of how we engage with those, I mean, there's a variety of mechanisms that we use. Obviously, for the individual researchers, we rely on things like annual surveys of researchers. We engage in focus groups and workshops with those researchers. We get feedback on a regular basis. We're in constant communication with the university community as well to try to understand what the needs are. With respect to the larger research platforms, they are often funded through some major federal funding initiative, research funding initiatives. And there's a network of what are called major science initiatives across the country that we interact with, both the funder, but also the individual major science initiatives. There's good overlap or good interactions with them to understand their needs. With respect to the data spaces, we held an open call. We invited research communities to apply to become a data space. And there was a set of criteria that we used around sort of the maturity level, the kinds of data they had, the alignment with some of our own priorities and the government's priorities to decide which to begin with to fund first. But obviously, this can only be just the beginning because there are many science domains. When you think, you know, we've got one for genomics, but of course, there's much more health data than genomics. And of course, genomics is not just about human genomics, it's about plant genomics and animal genomics and so on. So all to say there's a lot more work to do. And I think we are at the beginnings of it. But it is an effort, I think, to try to bring greater coherence across the research data ecosystem in Canada, which is, as you well know, complex and heterogeneous. But I think there are ways that we can begin to make progress. You know, I'm not a big believer in grand solutions. I'm much more a believer in you know, steps down a path towards a better future, effectively. And so that's kind of the journey that we're embarking on.
Yeah, I think, you know, and what is special also about our initiative is that there's, you know, these 26 different disciplinary actors working in their consortia, and a lot of it is about trust, I think, as well. You know, they know the needs of their different communities. I mean, you know, different climate sciences, they need unified discovery, standardized vocabularies perhaps, whereas healthcare needs a totally different approach to sharing data and streamlined access and very careful access, of course, and respecting different values. So I think data spaces are the way to go, and I think that's a really interesting approach you've taken. I mean, maybe onto kind of the more generic. I see that you also have a researcher council as well. I mean, if you were going, do you have the researcher council in place? And I think this is composed of researchers. Michael, are they deciding on the generic services that you have in place, or are they actually guiding the alliance in a more structural way, or shaping your other services for research data management? Are you listening to who's using these RDM, DMP tools or PID or, whatever?
Yeah. So the Research Council, excuse me, is another mechanism that we have in place to receive feedback and guidance from research community. So these are researchers from across the country who represent different research domains for different stages of their careers. Some are junior, some are more senior. We strive diversity on a number in a number of ways with the Researcher Council. It is chaired by a board member, so a member of the board of directors of DRAC. They meet regularly. We have sort of secretariat support for them from the Alliance, and they provide input, guidance, and advice on a whole range of topics, including the kinds of services that we provide. And we also, of course, will discuss with them our plans with respect to whether it's the databases or other initiatives around compute and data to get their feedback. So that's one. It's an important mechanism. They report both to management and to the board. So we ensure that leadership of the organization is hearing their voices. And I think the advantage is, of course, I mentioned the other surveys and workshops and so on, but often those individuals may have relatively limited knowledge of what we do, and so their feedback, we may or may not be able to action some of that feedback. Whereas with the Researcher Council members, because they are on the council for a number of years, they really get to know what we do very well, and their feedback can be even more helpful in that regard. So that's another important mechanism with which we listen to the researcher community. I also say that. So that's kind of let's say, the grassroots. The Researcher Council is made up not by university vice presidents of research, but by actual researchers who are faculty at that university. At the same time, we do need to engage with the leadership of universities, with the federal government who fund us, with provincial governments who often provide matching funds, and so there's another layer of engagement that is undertaken with the leadership of those major institutions and governments across Canada to try to ensure alignment. Not easy because each government has its own priorities. Different regions of the country are focused on often different areas of science even. But nonetheless, we try to ensure as best we can coherence at that level as well.
Yeah, alignment. This is difficult in a federated, I think this could be seen as a parallel with Germany. There's so many opportunities and many resources, but aligning across sort of a common architecture, common technical infrastructure, standards. These are all really big challenges, but one has to start somewhere. And maybe as your organization, you can take the lead in that and be seen as the trusted entity. And you also have. In Germany, we have a lot of trainers in open science and research data management. There's a lot of initiatives, many different areas, training on many different programs to ensure fair access to, fair research outputs. But do you have a training program as well? There is some training activities.
Yeah. So one of the I think the guiding principles for DRAC is, if it exists already, let's not reinvent it. And in a federation, in an environment where we have universities, all of them are working to some degree in these areas and providing training. Our aim is not to reinvent those training programs, but rather to help students and researchers find them and actually access them. So our focus to date has been largely on bringing some coherence, bringing some ability to allow researchers to identify training assets across the country and make it easier for them to be discovered. So we do have tools on a website, for example, that allow you to search for particular types of training and identify that training across the country. We are also now engaged in a process to try to develop more focused curricula for training, but again, that will largely not be developed by DRAC itself, but rather working with our partners to bring some of those training elements together in a coherent frame so that it provides that ability to develop the skills that researchers need. There's additional services that we provide as well directly from our staff for researchers who are accessing our environments, whether that's the data, the compute environments. So that's a form of training as well, but that's more person to person or directly provided to the
Okay.
researcher.
Okay, and that scales, does it? Is that something that's interesting? We might look further into that because that's, if the services are
Well,
heavily, yeah.
So, when you think about, when I go back to what do we do? Compute data people. The people aspect is, in my view, completely essential to to delivering on our mission. And the way that gets operationalized in the alliance. So I mentioned that we're a national organization. Canada is a federation of 10 provinces, 3 territories. We actually have the staff that we support, that service layer staff of skilled experts, they exist in every province. So though our host infrastructure, the supercomputer infrastructure, exists only in 3 provinces, 5 sites, 3 provinces, the staff actually are employed and are located in all 10 provinces of Canada, across 33 different universities and other education institutions. So they all provide national services. So you could have, for example, a researcher who is in Alberta, who is being supported by a staff person in Quebec to access compute that is located in British Columbia. These are all national services, and including the people services. But the point is, it gives also local expertise. It gives a nidus locally that faculty and students can work with. So we have currently about 300 FTEs across the country who are providing this service. I think it's a key asset for DRAC and our partners more broadly, and it's something that we're going to be looking to expand in the coming years.
Yeah. So I think, we can move to Rosie's question, which is in Australia, they struggle to have the expertise. I mean, resonates completely. It's a critical component. People are the most essential part of all of these infrastructures. And most of people are on short-term funding contracts and facing this issue of how do you retain good people? How do you upskill potential people, expertise, which is hard to find. And I assume, do you face that challenge? I know we do. And how can we make this better? How can we systematize this so it's kind of a structural? How can we have a workforce that's there with us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we face these same challenges for sure. One of the things that we're facing, in addition that wasn't mentioned, sort of an aging of this workforce. So there are some people, it's not been so much that we're losing people. I mean, of course, there is some issues with retention, but there's also the issue that of attracting new people into the environment, and there's some aging out of some of the workforce because some have been with our partner institutions for many years. But the reality is, yes, this is a struggle for Canada as well. The short-term contracts is an issue. We have traditionally been working on sort of annual contracts, which I think is not ideal. Now, the benefit, I guess, of our model is that because when I talk about this distributed workforce, this 300 people across the country, they are employed by their local institution. So it could be university or research institute. We are providing funding. In fact, we provide the majority of the funding for their salaries, but then there's a match locally. So what that means is though our portion of funding is on a short-term contract, their employment is actually with the institution. So there's some added security from that perspective. However, having said that, our aim would be to transition to longer term contracts. Part it reflects our own funding, our own ability to commit to longer term contracts. That has improved recently, I would say, with respect to our funding from the federal government. So I think we can have the ambition to move to longer term contracts. And I think at the same time, what I would say is there's an opportunity for us to move to more standardized agreements, service level agreements with our partners and for staff and also for researchers, so that we can that we can standardize the expectations that researchers can have for, response to queries and our ability to provide services. I think that's kind of the quid pro quo of moving to more longer term contracts, is to also improve the level of service by virtue of kind of SLAs and KPIs and so on. In terms of attracting people to this work, that is yes, that's a challenge here as well, and especially as we begin to move into new areas like AI, where these are new skills. All right, it's not just about high performance computing; it's also now about AI computing, and that's a different type of skill. It's a different hardware, different software, and so on. So that is a challenge that we're well aware of. And as we are bringing new people into DRAC and also across the workforce, we are identifying that as a gap that we need to fill. One of the ways that we're trying to do that as well is to work with industry, work with vendors, both on the hardware and software side, so that they can assist with some of the training and provide resources for it as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, so AI is an essential part of the infrastructure now, and we have to piece that into job descriptions, because it's hard to find people who, infrastructure is complex. There are many different aspects that need to be brought together, and so training people for infrastructure, it's not just hardware, software, and services. It's now AI to add to that mix, and that's a complex, but maybe, as you say, an opportunity then. So we should embrace that aspect and get different backgrounds and people with different skill sets.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say it comes back to this notion of not duplicating what's already out there. So, for example, in the area of AI for health, this is a key area in Canada. It's a key opportunity. It's an area that we are working more and more in. However, the expertise, what we are trying to do is actually partner with organizations, research platforms that have deep expertise with this already, and essentially create a partnership where we can provide access to the kind of compute that they need, that they may not have access to, or that historically they may have gone to the commercial cloud to obtain at high cost. So if we can provide some of that access to compute, and they can help, in turn, they can help us with upskilling and support, so that we can make AI for health research tools and supports more broadly available to researchers that may not be part of that platform. That becomes a win-win, and that is very much our philosophy, not just with respect to AI or in health, but really more broadly across science domains.
So that's people. Michael, before I do want to get onto the tricky question, which is sustainability. Some services will fly and they will be a contribution to science. Some won't. We know that some won't be sustained. They're not relevant. How can we, should resilience and sustainability be the first thing we need to think of as we develop services, or maybe this comes later? And how do we get the essential buy-in from the institutions and the commitment? I have many questions around this. And what about agreements with operators that you may have? Maybe you can say something about that. What is the outlook for the services in terms of sustainability?
Yeah.
Tricky.
Yeah, I think we all face this challenge, right? Of kind of having to prove our worth again and again, prove our value, and the need to be sustained. So I think there's a couple of things to say on this one. Number one, I think there is a need always to demonstrate impact, right? So it's not enough, I don't think, to point to metrics that would be with respect to, well, we've installed this many computers, or we've built this many databases, or we've hired this many people. Really, we have to be demonstrating impact. What is the impact of that work? How is it translated into research that has advanced discovery science in Canada? How has it enabled innovation in products or services that have benefited Canadians? How has it improved public services in whether it's health services or otherwise by virtue of the research that's been done? So that's something that I think organizations like ours need to do more effectively, and it can be a challenge because we're often a step removed from the researchers that are actually conducting the research. So it takes really conscious efforts, and we're trying to up our game in that space to identify those stories, and they really are stories. I think we have to do a better job of storytelling.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not about making things up. It's about actually, it's about simply telling the story of what actually is happening and what impact it's having, and making and translating it into a way that's understandable to the general public, but also, of course, decision makers, and aligns with things that they really care about. So I think that's one thing that we all have to probably do a better job of. And then there are other, if you look beneath the hood, essentially, how do you get to having that impact and having those stories? I think there are a number of ways that we benefit, or that we are trying to ensure sustainability. The first thing is, at least in Canada, we've been lucky in the last round of our funding, or at least the last engagements with the federal government, to receive multi-year funding. So, having a 5-year funding horizon, and that gives the ability to plan, it gives the ability to sustain services, it gives a planning horizon that is not sort of year to year or on 2-year time horizons and so on. And that is something that we would certainly hope to convince the federal government to continue to do. The second thing is, we've talked about compute data and people. There's a portfolio of services there within each of those, and we're actively managing that all the time. So we do, from time to time, look at a service that is provided, or an infrastructure, and if we can identify that it's not actually serving the purpose that we thought it would, or it's not being used, or there's something else that's come along that does it better, then we sundown those services or those platforms to try to redirect those resources to what is more impactful. The third area around sustainability is cost sharing. So the traditional model in Canada has been this kind of federal provincial match. And now that has its own set of challenges. I won't suggest that that's a panacea, but at least it does make sure that everybody's got some skin in the game, and is engaged. And it also requires that we then do an even better job of identifying priorities with a whole array of partners and trying to align as best we can. Um, the constant evolution and modernization. So it's not just about sundowning services, but also looking at, let's do a better job. Let's evolve and modernize the services that we're providing. So an example of that we talked about a moment ago is, in compute, the need to invest in AI compute, and that's something that we are engaged in right now. That's an important modernization of the hardware and software services, but also an evolution of our own services. So historically, we've been our process to allocate compute to researchers has been often on an annual basis. We're looking to modernize that to make it a much more frequent and dynamic allocation process, so researchers have access to compute more rapidly. Finally, I would say, I think one of the arguments that it is in the interest of all of our organizations to really drive home to our funders and our government partners is that they must see this, whether it's compute or data or the people, as critical infrastructure. This is critical national infrastructure that requires ongoing investments. There's often an argument that is made, well, let's set it up, and then you'll start to work with industry, and there'll be a revenue model, and industry will do some of this, and that's going to allow you to sustain. And look, that's important. It's something that we're doing as well. We do need to first of all work with industry, but second of all have revenue streams that are associated with that. But at the end of the day, it is my belief that this is going to require investments, ongoing public investments, just as our highways do, just as our ports and airports do, just as our public transit does. This must be seen as critical infrastructure. And I think government is starting to get it. So as we talk more and more about sovereignty, and this notion of sovereign AI is raised and identified by government as a priority, there's a recognition that we need to invest and ensure that we are truly sovereign in our capacity to exploit AI for the benefits of Canadian science, in public services, and ultimately for Canadians as a whole.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I think maybe in terms of sovereignty, I don't know how reliant you are on commercial platforms even outside Canada, perhaps, and that'll be an issue at national level. have some kind of harness, some kind of ownership or stewardship, I suppose, of all of these outputs, so that you're not storing them in places maybe that you can't control and get back. But I mean, I know that you talk a lot about integration, not fragmentation, and I think maybe that's the key. So I've picked up storytelling. So maybe we need really good communication experts to be able to translate these complex technical issues into stories that funders will understand. But also, as you say, aligning investments to build a sustainable system that's not so fragmented. But this, as you say, it takes time. And would you say we need to be patient for this? The people, the data, the compute, all has to come together, and the services need to be built in a sustainable way. So these issues are going to be in a stepwise fashion, and they're not going to happen overnight. Many different parts of this puzzle, I think. That's
Yeah.
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 That's
Well, it reminds me of the old joke of the traveler who's lost in a rural area of Ireland and driving around and bumps into a farmer in a field and he asks the farmer, I'm lost. I want to get to Dublin. And the farmer says, oh, well, I wouldn't start from here. Um, we are all basically that
yeah.
lost traveler, right? We are all sitting in a
Oh.
situation where we wouldn't start from here. If we had the choice to wind the clock back 40 years or 50 years and
Mm.
redevelop the whole system, we would have a much less fragmented system. We'd have a much more coherent, whether
Mm.
it's on the compute or the data of the people. But we're all where we are. All of us are where we are in our own countries. And so I do think that it's really about trying to sort of gradually and stepwise bring greater coherence. I think truthfully, what organizations like ours can really, where we can really help, is to develop and project a very clear vision, and
Mm.
bring the ecosystem and our partners along in development of that vision and ultimately in trying to make it come forward. So if we can kind of identify, this is the world that we're trying to build, and by the way, we're trying to do this together, and then identify the next steps, the first steps to get us there, what the priority elements are. I think that's an important role for organizations like ours. It's not easy. None of this is easy, but it's also really important. I think that's the other thing. It goes back to the storytelling. It's reminding people just how important this is. Why is this important? And how does this link to so many other issues? It's not just about, publications in peer-reviewed journals, which is important and great, but often politicians may not care that much about that. It's about also attracting and retaining the best talent in the country. It's about
Mm.
advancing services and innovation in the country and improving public services. It's about harnessing the rich resources of the country, both people and data. Data is a resource ultimately, and
Yeah.
certainly Canada is awash in rich data in just about every science domain you can imagine, and yet it's too hard to find and use right now. So that's a problem that we need to demonstrate that we can help solve.
So, Michael, we're nearly at the end, and I see a question from Annette Stroud-Davy, which is also about, how can you be outside Canada? And, I really hope that we could find some ways of working. There's the European Open Science Cloud, there's us in Germany. Perhaps we can pool minds and learn from each other. We've certainly learning a lot from you. Even if it's sort of granular level standards, skilling, training, these kind of things. I don't know about sharing services, but we can certainly share patterns and challenges and also opportunities. We're very lucky to be in the environment we're in, and I think we have challenges every day, but we're still marching ahead and finding solutions and managing lots of people in a successful way, I think. And just, I would like you to finish. I know that you have a busy day ahead of you. You haven't even started your meetings yet, so thank you. But perhaps I have wonderful team members here listening, and people in this call. Some inspiring thoughts for those people who are they're not in the trenches, but they're working very hard because they really believe in open science and sharing data. They're working hugely, committed, I would say, individuals. Something so they can continue their Tuesday, or start their Tuesday, or end their Tuesday, Michael. And then we bring
Well,
it to
that sounds very much like our own staff here in DRAC in Canada. They are also equally committed, equally hardworking, and very passionate about the work that we do. That's I think those are attributes that our community shares broadly. Look, I think the first thing to say is yes, we should be doing more, and making more efforts like this to work together, to learn from each other. Things that are, that are successes that you're having in Germany or successes that we're having in Canada, Australia, or Finland or wherever, and share those. So I think that we are actively engaged. We have a number of partnerships with international organizations. We have in the data spaces domain. We have joined the international. I can't remember the international data spaces. I'm not sure of the acronym of the
I
name,
think so. Yeah.
but we're part of that initiative. So yes, we need to be working more effectively together. And I think that's something that we can all take away as a to do. But ultimately, I do think each of us in our day to day need to take a step back and remember the why. Why are we
Mm.
showing up to work? Why did we take this job on in the first place? What are the things that we're accomplishing in this work? And I think there are so many examples of fantastic advances that are happening as a result of the work. Certainly, I can say that about the work of my staff, of staff in my colleagues here at Track, and I have no doubt it's the same for your staff in Germany and elsewhere. And again, let's identify those exemplars of discovery or innovation or improvements in
Mm.
public or a policy initiative that's happened as a result of some discovery or learning that's resulted from bringing data and compute and expertise together and allowing researchers to unleash their knowledge, their intelligence, and their creativity on that.
That's a lovely note to end on. So I really hope this is the start of a future dialogue between our organisations. Let's keep the doors open. Maybe we can meet all together at some point. I wish you a good day. I would like to thank you very much. I see virtual nodding heads. I think we've all really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. I would like to plug our next Fireside Chat, which is with Rosie Hicks, the CEO of the Australian Research Data Commons, on the 19th of June at 10 CEST, which is 8 o'clock UTC. And you can find the registration on the Base website. Do please tune in. And a special thanks to my wonderful team, Melina, who held this all together. Without her, this wouldn't have happened. So, Michael, I have a good week, have a good day. And it's been really great to talk to you. And thank you so much for your commitment and, sharing your
Well,
knowledge with us today.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Najla. Wonderful conversation,
Yeah.
and let's continue to work together. And thank you to your team as well.
Yeah. Thanks a
Have a great
lot.
day.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Bye bye.